as mentioned, I am on sabbatical. My remarks today do not reflect my employer. They're mine and mine alone. I'm really pleased that the Middle East Monitor has decided to hold this event to take stock of the Oslo process, which was the subject of some fascination by myself and academic research. And the timing is clearly ripe given the dim developments on the ground, a few of which have been addressed. We've seen the Trump administration move its embassy to Jerusalem and effectively take it off the table, in their words, from any final status negotiation. The canceling of U.S. funding to UNRWA, another cold-hearted, senseless, kick when they're down. The closing of the PLO office in D.C., and most recently, John Bolton, one of just scores of extremists employed by the Trump administration, has said that the U.S. will prosecute ICC officials if they pursue Americans for war crimes that they committed, or any American ally, in an explicit reference to Israel, which the Palestinians have recently tried to have investigated for their war crimes in Gaza. So it's pretty grim on the American scene, and as has been addressed in Israel, the rightward shift is growing. Israel's racism is growing more and more naked every day. The nationality law was just one of many manifestations, and it's hard to see in the trajectory of Israeli politics that trend being reversed. But out of the Oslo ashes, there's new possibilities. Israel is on a fast track to becoming apartheid status state. Some would argue here that it already is, but what matters is global public opinion. And I think there's a concurrent rise in the nonviolent boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which is gaining currency, not just in Europe, but also in the United States. And I think if anyone wanted to see how clumsily the Israeli government is trying to counter it and address it, you can watch Al Jazeera's investigation into the lobby, Britain, the UK edition, which aired in January 2017. They're coming at it very ham-handedly, and it's really the death throes when they're realizing that this branding is sticking, and they're resorting to a new type of Black September, except against academics and activists, who they consider a bigger threat than Iran, oddly enough. So, to speak of Oslo, I recently, and I apologize to Professor Pape, I recently did my doctoral work at the University of Exeter, and I droned on and on about biased mediation. I had to have a theory to address the scholarship I've done, so I chose sort of obscure area of international conflict resolution, which is biased mediation theory. And I got to say, I usually I'm a TV guy these days, but occasionally academic theory can prove interesting. And I'm going to try to make this theory interesting for you, because I've read through a lot of it. The reason that I was interested in it, there was an obscure obituary in 2008 that I read. It caught my eye. A Tel Aviv professor named Sadia Tuval, who was a specialist in international conflict resolution, had died. And Aaron David Miller, who was one of the negotiators, said that Professor Tuval had influenced and inspired his work on biased mediation. So I said, okay, it's biased mediation. Self-identification is good. Aaron David Miller would later go on to write an op-ed discussing what he described as the U.S. mediation role as Israel's lawyer. So, okay, what's biased mediation? I looked at Sadia Tuval's works and other scholars that have happened since. And Sadia Tuval's work was basically done in the 1970s, drawing on data sets of U.S. mediation in the Arab-Israeli conflict. And it's centered around a basic principle, and you'll see where I'm going with this. So, in a two-way conflict, if you have a mediator, the possibility of a coalition exists. So, if you're biased, you're going to have a coalition. You're taking one of the sides of the warring party. So the theory goes by Tuval, the disfavored party is going to work overtime to try to drive a wedge between you and your favored party. And the favored party is going to work overtime to keep you on side. He doesn't want you to defect. Bear with me, because you're going to see the stark contrast of what is supposed to be intended and what actually happens. So the bias is supposed to be kept in check by the mediator's desire to preserve its acceptability. It doesn't want to go too far because it doesn't want to get fired. That's what would happen theoretically if the bias was too extreme. The key benefit of a biased mediator, two things. One, that you will have superior insights into the warring parties. So people that are fighting, they don't really know much about each other, and you are able to go in between them and filter information, accurately convey it to the other side. And a biased mediator has to be truthful. Its words have to be credible. If it is not trusted to convey messages that increase the likelihood of war, it won't be trusted to convey messages that decrease them either. So you got to be truthful, you've got to be credible, you have to have superior insights. You also, crucially, and this is supposed to be the benefit of a biased mediator, according to Tuval, is that you're going to deliver the side you're biased towards. More recent scholarship done since Tuval's death has looked at conflict data sets from 1990 to 2005, and basically they ingest the particulars of a conflict, whether it's African conflicts or Eastern European ones, etc., and they examine whether biased mediation worked. And recent scholarship suggests it does not work. And little surprise, it's been found to prove relatively ineffective, except for where the biased mediator advocates on behalf of the weaker party. And one scholar from New York University who studied this in more recent sense wrote something that I found was particularly striking. Without power parity in a negotiation, the intervention can easily become a sham in which the stronger party influences the interaction for its own benefit while the fundamental issues remain unaddressed. Sound familiar? So the other findings of more recent scholarship on biased mediation is that a biased mediator is going to self-select into a conflict. They're going to throw their hands up in the front of the classroom and say, pick me. Mediation is expensive, and it can be costly diplomatic, but you have to question the motive of why does someone want to throw themselves in the middle of this. It's because the data says they want to influence the outcome for their own benefit and that of their client state. What's supposed to guard against biased mediation? Well, having high power over the future welfare of a mediation, that's one of them. But if we just address what happened in Oslo one by one, I think I can sort of tell you where I'm going with this. Former AIPAC official turned U.S. mediator Martin Indyk said early on in the Oslo process that even-handedness is not in our lexicon when it comes to American mediation. This is in spite of the Madrid process. The United States committed itself to being an honest broker. He'd use those words. But from the outset, Indyk comes in and says, we're not going to be even-handed. Former AIPAC official turned Dennis Ross, yes, there's several of them, said in his writings that peacemaking required that the Arabs understand that no wedge could be driven between the U.S. and Israel. There goes the possibility of a defection in a biased mediation scenario. And as I demonstrated in the research I did for my book on the truth about Camp David, both Ross and Indyk demonstrated in both word and deed that they believed and they acted on those remarks. They were not going to be even-handed. And a wedge was never possible for the Palestinians to attempt to drive. They did not offer any superior insights. One of the things I was surprised about interviewing Israelis, as well as Palestinians, they said that anything meaningful that they got done leading up to Camp David, and Omar Dajani, who's here, I think he'll have a similar recollection, they got done when the Americans weren't in the room. Many Israelis felt that the Americans did not have superior insights into the Palestinian teams. In fact, they had a better understanding of the Palestinians themselves. The Americans offered no expertise on the Arab world or Islam. In their memoirs since, if you read them, they talk about how they came at this issue as American Jews, and that's where their starting point was, and their personal affinity to Israel. So it's much deeper than just the U.S.-Israeli relationship from state to state. These mediators came at it with a very deep personal connection to the state of Israel. Indyk living there during the 73 war. They had family relationships there. The Palestinians could never hope to compete with that. So biased American mediators under Oslo didn't understand Israeli positions. This was evident at Camp David when they were as much astonished, if not disapproving, of certain ideas that Ehud Barak had entertained on Jerusalem. One negotiator thought that, and was quoted saying that Ehud is nuts for doing this. Later, in territorial discussions in December 2000, Dennis Ross would tell the Palestinians, you're going to get maximum this percent of land, and then the Israelis would go and increase it. He actually had lesser bottom lines than the Israelis were willing to. And the scholarship addresses that. It says that there's a category of extreme, on the extreme band of things called more royal than the king, or even agent provocateur. This is where the mediator takes positions that are more Catholic than the Pope, or even they just do things to, as I think Kushner was quoted saying, just disrupt things, for the sake of it. I would characterize Oslo in this period up to Trump less as more royal than the king and more as extremist mediator. And this is the shift certainly from Clinton to Trump. The reasons are many, but if you look at the bios of Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt, David Friedman, Kushner is President Trump's point man and is the one that is supposed to be coming up with the deal of the century. Jason Greenblatt is the mediator on the ground. David Friedman, they've all supported settlements. Netanyahu used to stay at the Kushner's house when he was a child. They've given money, their families have given money to settlements, nonprofits in America. They funded that help settlements in Israel in violation of U.S. policy. They tried even before taking office to manipulate the UN Security Council vote condemning settlements. These people are willing to break the law before they're in office. How do you think they're going to behave when they're in? Well, little surprise. They said when they campaigned they were going to move the embassy. They did. They've taken the most extreme line on everything to disadvantage the Palestinians, which is somewhat refreshing because they're not pretending to be someone they're not, unlike many people who had preceded them. I say the parties that have to share blame for this asymmetry, the Palestinians for allowing it. They could have rejected a mediator, and in fact, many times they did complain about biased mediators, especially Dennis Ross during Oslo. There was no consequences, but they didn't have to show up, and the pressure would have reverted back to them had they done that. But also the Arab states, they bear a large responsibility for this. There's no credible countermeasure to the Israeli state. I think it was Tom Segev recently wrote in Haaretz that Israel is too strong for its own good. Unlike in 1973, when Arab states had used force to bloody the nose and bring Israel to the bargaining state, and then later used nonviolent tactics like an oil embargo, no such credible counterweight exists today. Thank you. Which is why populist movements like BDS are faring so well, and I actually think that that's the solution. The bottom line, the U.S. is unsuitable for a mediator in any sense of the word. It doesn't even meet the definition of biased mediation. It needs its own category. It doesn't have any scholarly basis. It doesn't follow the rules that was supposed to be in place as described by the scholarship. It's not costly for Americans to be seen as siding with Israel against Palestinians. In fact, the opposite's true. The domestic American political benefits of being zealously pro-Israel outweigh any diplomatic cost from screwing over Palestinians. And if anything, to Tuval's point that being a biased mediator is good because you can deliver, the Americans can't deliver the Israelis. Since every president from Lyndon Johnson to Obama that cared about settlements, the Israelis didn't listen to him. Now Trump, he's given them a free hand. He can at least say that he's not trying to restrain them. In fact, the opposite is true. The Arab states go to Israel to deliver the Americans. Just look at the Saudi lobby, look at some GCC states. They court right-wing American supporters of Israel as well as the Israeli state to get the Congress a good scorecard so they can look the other way on their human rights abuses and continue the spigot of aid and weapons so that they can bomb and pummel people like in Yemen. If anything, now that the Trump administration is here, the world has recognized the U.S. is unsuitable. out of the ashes, new possibilities exist. The UN, though feckless, could play a role. It won't. The EU is divided, and as has been referenced, the divide over Brexit and the future of the EU is at a time when they can't really actively engage. So it's on civil society. They will seek a remedy, and I think that's where this failed experiment of Oslo has taken us. And I thank you all for your time.